India for giving such a very beautiful wheel of prestige introduction. It was really thrilling how you presented the biodata. It is very nice. Thank you so much. And my senior, Dr. Savita Singhal ma'am, will now introduce our eminent faculties. The stars that we have on the cogwheel will be introduced by her.
Be very short because we are going to discuss.
I think very good afternoon to everybody. Just I will take only a few minutes for this introduction of our expert of galaxy of panelists. First of all, the chairperson is Dr. Mandakini Main. She is chairperson for ICOG, everybody knows. Then Dr. Prag Benewala, who is secretary for ICOG. Then our first panelist is Dr. Ragini Agarwal, and she is a founder, president of Haryana Obs and Gynae Society, and at present vice president of National Foxy. So I welcome and invite Dr. Ragini as our panelist. And then Dr. Manju Puri, I think she needs no introduction, teacher of the teachers, and my teacher as well. And let's all congratulate her on attaining this prestigious HOD for Lady Hardinge Medical College. So everybody should clap and just appreciate. And then our next panelist is Dr. Ashok Kumar. He again needs no introduction. He's director professor at BAMC and executive member of ICOG and conducting so many PG teaching conferences all over India. And then next, I think I give to Dr. Jyoti Malik, please.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Savita. Actually, we have introduced them so briefly because everybody knows about them. And two more eminent speakers that we have today with us. One is Dr. Girija, and she is a senior consultant professor at Cloud9 Hospital, Pune. And another very eminent speaker, we have Dr. Manoj Sharma, who's professor and head hepatology, ILBS, New Delhi, a hospital which just deals with only hepatic diseases. So actually our star faculty is, we have introduced them very, very briefly because I assume that everybody knows them. So starting because we have a long panel, I would first ask, can I share my screen, Mr. Panda now? So first we would start with, actually since we are dealing with the liver diseases, my first question would be to Dr. Manoj Sharma, sir. How does the physiological changes of pregnancy briefly affect our LFT? Since we have so many diseases specific to pregnancy, we have intrahepatic cholestasis, we have acute fatty liver, hyperemesis, preeclampsia, hepatic syndrome, HELP syndrome, hepatitis A, B, C, D, E, alcoholic liver diseases, autoimmune diseases, cholelithiasis, and so many things. So can you just please briefly tell us what are the physiological changes in pregnancy? Do they affect the LFTs, and how do they affect, and how do we interpret these?
Yeah. So let me start by thanking the organizers, Dr. Manju Puri, Dr. Jyoti Malik, and all other members who invited me and given me this opportunity. Liver disease in pregnancy is a very important topic. And you will see many patients who have slightly abnormal LFT, you don't know what to do, how to investigate them. So I will start with a general term that most of the liver function tests are within normal limits in pregnancy, with a few exceptions.
Jyoti ma'am, we have to make it full screen, ma'am.
Jyoti, make it slideshow.
Slideshow. You have to make it slideshow.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what I was saying that most of the liver function tests are within normal limits during pregnancy, with a few exceptions. And in fact, many of the liver function tests are below normal also. For example, if we see serum ALT and AST, which are also known as SGOT and SGPT, they will not change much in pregnancy. They will remain within normal limits. And in fact, there is some suggestion that they become 20% less their value becomes 20% less as compared to the normal pregnant women during pregnancy. Similarly, total bilirubin levels are also decreased in all the three trimester and as much as 33% by second trimester. Similarly, GGTP and PTINR, they will also remain normal. Now the exceptions. Alkaline phosphatase, we all know it is pregnancy derived, it is placental derived, and it will rise in the third trimester of pregnancy. Now serum albumin, very important marker for as far as liver diseases are concerned, and this decreases due to hemodilution. Now these are some of the changes that occur in liver function tests, but we have to keep in mind that not only the liver function tests are affected by liver diseases, but there are many other conditions also which can affect the liver function tests. For example, food ingestion may also affect the levels of the enzymes. For example, bilirubin, AST/ALT. Bilirubin decreases after fasting. AST/ALT may increase slightly after food ingestion. Now, day-to-day variations are also there. Almost about 15 to 30% variations in liver function tests can occur during the daytime also. Most highest levels are seen in the afternoon times and the least levels are seen in the night time. So these things also need to be kept in mind. BMI, very important. Obese persons have higher level of AST and ALT as compared to the lean persons. Alkaline phosphatase is also higher, about 25% higher in obese subjects. Hemolysis is very important cause. Whenever you see indirect hyperbilirubinemia, always think of hemolysis rather than liver diseases. Similarly, exercise, bilirubin is higher among persons who do regular exercise. Similarly, AST due to muscle injury can be higher in patients who are doing exercise regularly. Smoking, 10% increase in alkaline phosphatase levels in smokers as compared to the non-smokers. And muscle injury we have discussed, more so in the raise of AST as compared to the ALT. Then bone diseases, alkaline phosphatase are increased. And there is some suggestion also about the race, which is not obviously relevant, but in African American men and women, these levels are significantly higher. One important point I want to discuss is that never rely on single values, always see the trend. And if you see the whole picture of the liver function test, they will suggest category of liver diseases. For example, whether the patient is having hepatocellular type of injury, whether the patient is having cholestatic type of injury, whether they are having mixed type of picture. They will never give a specific diagnosis, but they will categorize patients and then we can proceed accordingly to further investigate the cause.
Thank you so much, sir. We never knew so many diurnal, even liver function tests do have so much of variation, right from your race and BMI and the diurnal variations and all. And also the pregnancy, the hemodilution, which changes all the albumin, the bilirubin and the fibrinogens.
Right.
Now, a very important question we are coming to Dr. Parag. Dr. Parag, how do we evaluate any pregnant woman with a liver disease? Because then we commonly decide it here and discuss it here so that every time now, then we do not go on to evaluation of the patient in the forthcoming cases that we have.
Right. Jyoti, before I answer on behalf of ICOG, I would just like to thank the Haryana OBGYN Societies, Dr. Ragini, yourself, Dr. Savita and the entire team. And I'm happy that two of my governing council members, Dr. Ashok and Dr. Girija, also are here with me as representing the ICOG. Thank you once again. Dr. Meg could not join because of her personal commitment. But then I'm really happy to be here as representative of ICOG. Right. So when we talk about evaluation of any pregnant patient, we always have to start with detailed history. Now, when we are talking about liver diseases, the first thing that always comes in our mind, and probably the commonest condition, would be hepatitis A. And when we refer to the clinical situation of hepatitis A, it would typically be, there would be a history of fever, anorexia, malaise, nausea, vomiting. Now, some women can complain of diarrhea. There would be history of jaundice in the family or neighbor or exposure to contaminated food. Of course, there are other presentations also like pruritus, which again, or dark clay colored stool, dark urine, which would be pointers for obstructive jaundice. We must take history of drug administration in detail. There are drugs like antituberculous medications or drugs like erythromycin, which can cause jaundice at any point of time. History of jaundice in the family, or even drug abuse, tattoos, etc. These are all things which we must ask. Of course, in the severe cases, we have to look at history suggestive of headache or convulsions, where we could be dealing with a case of hepatic encephalopathy.
Yes.
Right. And then typically when we examine, it is important that we assess the general condition. We must record the blood pressure, because it could be the hepatic dysfunction could be secondary to high blood pressure also. We must look for presence of pallor, icterus. Level of consciousness is equally important. Scratch marks would guide us as to how much itching the patient is experiencing. There could be presence of edema or ascites, which would tell us that probably we are dealing with a chronic liver disease, or presence of hepatomegaly, or even splenomegaly. And tenderness in the right hypochondrium can also be noted, especially in women who have hepatitis A. Right, and of course, the examination is not complete unless we do a detailed obstetric examination also. And then coming to various investigations. Now, investigations can be divided into routine or specific. It is important for us to do a peripheral blood smear, the hemogram with CBC. LFTs are extremely important, and they will guide us as to what kind of, or what is the severity of the liver dysfunction that we are dealing with. Urine examination is important. We also have to look at the coagulation profile. And there are specific investigations like viral serology, maybe ultrasound or MRI of liver can be done in select cases. Liver biopsy per se will have a very, very limited role, especially in case of pregnancy. And of course, if we are suspecting autoimmune conditions, we have to specifically do other investigations.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Parag. Next, we would be, next I request Dr. Savita Singhal to please come in.
Okay, I think now this next question goes to Dr. Ragini. The patient, Dr. Ragini is not visible. She's on the screen.
I'm very much on a screen.
Okay.
Tell.
Yeah, Vaishali, 26-year-old, gravid 2, para 1 with 30 weeks pregnancy, with history of itching for last 15 days. And she's giving similar history in the previous pregnancy, pruritus and jaundice. Now she's antenatal check, everything is normal, no complaints. And no examination, no icterus, no hepatosplenomegaly, scratch marks are there. And there is no evidence of scabies. Obstetric examination uneventful. Investigation bilirubin slightly increased, 2.3. AST and LAT are slightly increased, 200 and 104. Orthotomy time is normal. So what do you think? What is the diagnosis for this patient?
Savita, this patient, when we see, there are a few points. There's a history of pruritus and jaundice in the previous pregnancy. The second thing what we see is there's a scratch marks positive, but there's no icterus or hepatosplenomegaly as such. There's no other evidence of any other evidence of scabies or anything. And next thing what we see in the investigation is marginally raised bilirubin, and direct is more, with the trans aminase are high. So this is basically is the thing which we deal day in and day out in our OPDs. That is the obstetric cholestasis or intrahepatic cholestasis. And this is a very, very important thing because it has a direct effect on the fetus health. Patient.
Do you want to keep some differential for this?
Yes, we can have this differential for this in the case of the dermatosis. Many dermatosis can appear during the pregnancy, but all the differentials of the dermatosis has some lesions. Here, there's no lesion. And when we talk about the hepatitis, hepatitis has a very high bilirubin and the usually ALT and aspartate transaminase is in a very, very high range, usually more than 1,000. So in this particular case, it is very clear-cut case of the intrahepatic cholestasis, and we should go for the bile acid.
Clear, it is intrahepatic cholestasis. What is the special symptoms we can say?
The one thing which we have missed is the bile acid. Bile acid level is very important because this is the only level which we are going to monitor weekly. And the bile acid, the moment it crosses 40, there should be an alert because patient is going in the range where it can have an effect on the fetus. And after 100, when it crosses the 100, we have to terminate that pregnancy because the high stillbirth is very, very high. So the bile acid we have to see. And the second thing which is very important in these cases, we should always have a guarded prognosis with the patient because patients' no fetal surveillance is very accurate. One day before she came to you and all the parameters, even Doppler and the CTG is normal, and next day baby maybe no more. So we have our guarded prognosis to be given. Maybe it is documented and these patients should be delivered by 36 to 37 weeks until unless you have diagnosed it late. And as far as cesarean and the normal is considered, you can always take this patient for the induction of the delivery labor, and only cesarean is mandatory if there's some fetal indication or the obstetrical indication is there. So
very, very well explained, Dr. Ragini. So termination should be at 37 weeks because
and
of the bile acids. So main problem.
Savita madam, I would want to ask you, with your vast experience, what have you seen? Like, have you been able to do the bile salts in such people?
Yeah, by my past experience, what I say that it is very, very essential to terminate the pregnancy at 37 weeks. Okay. I can just share my two patients. One was a medical with us only, had doing residency. She was advised termination at 38 weeks. She just came to us 3 days prior to 38 weeks and with early labors and decreased fetal movement since morning. And to us, it was a surprise that we thought she has IUD.
Oh my goodness.
So this is some condition should not be taken lightly.
Yeah, but
there are minimal symptoms, no symptoms, minimal symptoms are there. We should not take it lightly because there's the acute anoxia is there. It is not that there will be no IEG or there will be no decrease in the liquor, no fetal symptom will be there. Sudden IUD, and most probable reason for that meconium is always about 50% of patients we see the meconium. And that meconium sometimes leads to, what is Judy said, that meconium leads to umbilical vein constriction, acute anoxia and acute IUD. So one more patient, she had IUD at 37.3 days without any, it was just, to us very surprising. So now what I want to convey, that every patient who is having idiopathic cholestasis jaundice, whenever it present to us, she should be again and again stressed that she should deliver the baby by 36 weeks, by 37 weeks. And we should tell the date, exact date to the patient so that even if doctor is not available, she is not there, she can go to somewhere. The pregnancy has to be terminated at 37 weeks. And if bile acids, Dr. Agni is very well said, the bile acids are more than 100. Now the recent guidelines are that, and consensus is that more than 100, we may terminate earlier than 37 weeks.
Can I add on a bit? Savita, can I just add on?
Yes, please, sure.
Actually, what is happening is that especially in North India, I don't know what is happening in other parts of the country, but North India, we have n number of patients who are coming with pruritus.
Yeah.
Itching in the palms and soles. The number is gone up so much.
Yeah, because of obesity, madam. It's because of the underlying obesity.
Right. So now what is happening is that a lot of terminations are being done even when the bile acids are 14, 15. So what we need to understand is that I agree that, we have to terminate the pregnancy, but it could be anything between 37 to 38 weeks instead of, being dot at 37.
Yeah.
It would also depend upon what is the bile acid level. If the level is above 40, it is justified.
Yeah, definitely.
Dr. Manju, I want to ask you the same question. Where do we get the bile salts done? They are not easily accessible in all the labs.
No, in Delhi it is done. I am to say we get it done from Gangaram Hospital and the Lal Lab. But then, I'm to say, if you get the bile acids done, the downside is that inductions are much more. Because even at the slightest increase, people would jump at,
We have to see the
just I
level.
want
It is
to add
not
here.
like 10. Yeah.
Yeah, just want to add here. Actually, see, the situation is one should monitor it.
Ashok, you're bit loud, little loud.
Yeah, we have to monitor it by bile acid only. But see, 10 is the cutoff, which is normal or abnormal. But usually 15, 20, actually absolute value is not very important. Rather than we have to do the serial bile acid. What is happening that most of the people are doing bile acid once in their pregnancy when the patient has been itching, but they are not monitoring the bile acids. That is the more important thing, because when you are doing bile acid, you have to monitor it weekly, at least minimum weekly, so that whenever it is, you get the serial
Ashok, be
increase.
little loud,
Or
not
if it is-
audible at all.
If it is, you are not.
I think there must
Let
be
me
some
see from where we
background.
can,
Yeah, it's okay, sir. You can continue, please.
if we can increase the sound somewhere. Yes, I can increase my, I think, sound value, which is maximum.
Yeah, carry on, Ashok. We are.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that single value is not important that much until it is crossing 40 or more than 100. But still, I will not take any decision on single value. I would like to have serial value. If it is increase or if it is 20, doesn't matter. Until these.
Sir, we have a question. If
No,
suppose
just 10, 20 values is relevant if we are at 37 weeks. If we are not at 37 weeks, then probably we have to see the value. If it is significantly high, I will go for 35, 40. Then only we will think of termination. Otherwise, just cross 37 weeks or be near 38. But I will advocate that we should not cross 38 weeks, because we have seen IUDs that.
It should not cross 38 weeks. At least this message should go to everyone. It should not cross 38 weeks, and a very high chance of the stillbirths are there.
Suppose the symptoms subside, suppose the itching subsides, if we have given her UDCA and the symptoms subside, so do we still?
But you have to keep surveillance.
If you read the theory,
You have to keep the surveillance.
see, if you read the theory part, it says that you believe or any drug will not cure the underlying pathophysiology.
Yeah.
That will continue. These will give you the symptomatic relief.
And
Right. So if you feel the symptoms are okay, patient has improved, that doesn't mean that you will relax on your monitoring part. Right.
even
The
this
symptoms
message should go to the patients.
And one should reduce the dose of UDCA also, Udiliv also, if you feel there's a symptomatic improvement. See, you are just buying the time by giving all these. Basically, that is where you are buying.
Actually,
and
the
you want to
culprit is
reach to the
progesterones also are the
maturity level
culprit.
as far as possible.
And
Can I add
want to comment?
Observed.
One thing I want to comment that
This
if
is very
you have
commonly
started,
observed
you
that
have
response
done for a liver
administration is-
test and it is normal, and you have started UDCA. Now you are not going to get the even rise in the levels, and it will always create a problem in your mind. But if your pruritus is responding to UDCA, you have to be very, very careful and go for your serial monitoring of the bile acid. Bile acid is more important than your aminotransferase.
Right, ma'am.
Can I add?
Yeah.
So, and one more thing here is, if you feel that your Udiliv and by this the symptoms and bile acids have are in the decreasing trend or they have stabilized, But I have observed that when usually the doctors keep on waiting, they may continue till 40 weeks, but that should not be the case. Even if your symptoms have improved or the bile acid is stabilized, but they are higher than normal on drug. So if you cross 37 or you are near 38, you should terminate the pregnancy. There's no point in waiting for that.
Any comment on SAMe? What any addition of SAMe would help?
Sorry?
S-adenosyl methionine. Does
No,
it
actually,
Usually we don't
It's a
start.
doubtful role is there.
Jyoti, I wanted to add one more thing, that when we are talking about termination of pregnancy, we must also take into account in case she's already had a previous IUD somewhere in the past. In that case, that gestation becomes critical. That is one point where you might have to terminate even before 37 weeks. The second is, if in spite of UDLIV, your serial bile acids are rising. So that also becomes an indication for a premature termination of pregnancy. Or if the levels are more than 100. Right?
Yes.
So these are three indications wherein a termination will have to be planned before 37 weeks, anytime between 34 and 37. So this is a very, very important take-home message which everyone must remember.
And one more important thing in
dose
this is
also
there's
has to be given properly, because many times less amount of dose is given for the symptomatic relief, because many times women's weights are more. So we have to calculate it as per their weight always. And then there will be a proper relief for them. Of course, as Sir said, surveillance has to continue.
right?
But here I can add here,
Okay, I
that usually we give 300 milligram BD UDLIV. I think that is not sufficient. One should go for 600 milligram BD.
600 milligrams.
600.
outer limit is 21 milligram per kg body weight.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Role of rifampicin as
Now
well.
the take home
coming
message is that we should deliver 37 to 38 before 37 if bile acids are more than 100 or previous history of IUD at that gestation.
Right.
And there is the role of rifampicin as well in intractable
Yeah.
patients.
If
They
patient
will
not responding to cholestyramine, then this UDLIV we can
rifampicin can be added.
rifampicin.
Yeah.
But most of the
Thank you,
guidelines we say 37 weeks.
Coming on
Two
to our
IUDs after
next,
37
coming
to
on to
38. We can go to
hepatitis.
next case now.
Coming on to hepatitis, this question goes to Dr. Ashok Kumar, sir. Sir, this is second gravida, 30 weeks with jaundice, history of prodromal symptoms, no itching. So we have ruled out cholestasis. And icterus is 2+. She has tender hepatomegaly. The investigations show a rise of bilirubin to 7.2. AST, ALT are quite high, 1000 and 950. And the viral markers are positive. So she is IgM HAV positive. Now, how will we proceed in this case?
Actually, madam, nowadays hepatitis, this is hepatitis A, because
A,
that
sir.
is
Right.
clear with the viral mark. But usually nowadays hepatitis A is not that very common. It is very uncommon. And I think Dr. Sharma is here. He will agree with me that hepatitis E is very common in pregnancy. And mostly we see hepatitis E only, because A is almost, I think, probably the incidence in pregnancy, what we have done our observation of jaundice in pregnancy and hepatitis in pregnancy for last 20 years, we found that around 1 or 2% is the prevalence of hepatitis A in pregnancy. So I think hepatitis A is not a concern. Earlier it was a concern for us.
Just to
but now-
complete the list, we wanted to take it because though we would be coming on to hepatitis E also,
Yes,
and
madam.
E and E also, but just to complete the list, we thought let's also touch it upon because it has a fecal-oral route. So it is though not.
So
as
basically the
bad-
treatment is symptomatic for hepatitis A. Usually they are very mild and they are self-limiting disease. So within 6 to 8 weeks, patient recovers on her own with your symptomatic and observation. Keep on monitoring LFT that her enzyme should not go beyond limit, and bilirubin should not be more than 10 or 15. So we have to just keep a watch that, just basically observe her for that, whether she is not going acute hepatitis, acute viral hepatitis or fulminant hepatitis. So that is the only thing we have to keep watch on.
How
Other
the vaccination, sir? Any immunoprophylaxis during pregnancy? Do you suggest anything?
actually, they have been there in the books, it is written that yes, you can give all these things, but even when the patient is IgM, you can give IgG to the baby and all this. But madam, they are so basically now what I feel that when we are in the endemic area, or if we are going in an endemic area, then we should consider all this. Otherwise, it is a self-limiting disease, very mild one. What about Dr. Sharma? What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, the immunoprophylaxis is not useful in our setting where there is a hyperendemic situation and titers of antibodies are positive in about 90% of the population. So immunoprophylaxis is not indicated here.
Right, sir. And even I think immunoglobulins to the baby also only after if there is within 2 weeks of delivery or immediate postpartum, then we need to give immunoglobulins to the baby. And also we don't the breastfeeding has to continue. It is not contraindicated in HAV infection. Now, Dr. Savita, please.
Dr. Manjupuri.
Yeah.
31-year-old, 14 weeks pregnancy, came with just asymptomatic patient, came with report that she is positive. She has been referred from civil hospital because once they saw the labor, they referred to tertiary care. So how are you going to evaluate this woman?
There was a time when actually we were not paying so much of heed to it except for giving universal precautions at the time of fever. And then came the immunoprophylaxis and the vaccination. One more component which has been added now is the antiviral therapy in the antepartum period. So now if we look at the possible routes of transmission of hepatitis B virus, why is this asymptomatic carrier important? This is because 50% of the global burden of vitamin B, viral chronic hepatitis is because of vertical transmission. So as an obstetrician, we should put in all our efforts to prevent this vertical transmission. And this transmission mainly would happen at the time of delivery, that is about 60 to 80%. But a considerable amount of transmission would occur even in the intrauterine part, which we were not taking care of initially. And of course, it can also happen during the breastfeeding. But breastfeeding is actually covered because we are giving both active and passive immunity to the baby, so the breastfeeding can continue. So here, the questions which need to be answered are: one, are there any antenatal interventions for the pregnant women who is hepatitis B surface antigen positive? Second is, what is the mode of delivery? And third is, what about the breastfeeding? So if we look at, if it is an asymptomatic patient, usually it would be a chronic carrier, but it could be acute hepatitis also because it can be quite mild sometimes. So basically we need to differentiate between the two. But normally if we come across a patient who is hepatitis B surface antigen positive, we would normally in these cases, in case they do not have any jaundice, we would first go for liver function test. So that is what we would go for. And also go for hepatitis B-E antigen testing. So these are two things which we do. So I think we can leave this slide and move on to the next. So this is what the flow is, the antepartum management. In the first visit, this patient is 14 weeks. So we have to do a baseline LFT. We have to also do a HPV DNA load, which we were not doing initially, but we need to have this. We also have to see whether the virus is replicating. Is it an active disease? So we have to do hepatitis B-E antigen. And we also do anti-hepatitis B-E, antibodies to hepatitis B-E antigen. So if the viral load is high, we need to refer her to a hepatologist. In any case, any patient who is a carrier, we need to take an opinion from a hepatologist in the beginning and then move on. We would normally refer them only if they have, high, if the LFTs are deranged. That is the time we would normally refer, but I think these patients have to be under constant surveillance. So these are not the ones who can be left alone. And it is very important that in these patients, we would take the history of high-risk factors and also find out whether the husband is a carrier or not. And we need to test also in case the status of the husband and the previous babies are not known, we better look at that as well. And if the levels of hepatitis B, DNA are low, so in that case, we have to repeat the levels at 26 to 28 weeks. So we need to recheck them at 26 to 28 weeks, because it is said that in case the viral load is more than 2 lakh international units per ml at 26 to 28 weeks, we need to put these patients on antiviral therapy, because that will help in reduction of the vertical transmission. But if the loads are less than 2 lakh international units per ml, in that case, we can leave the baby with the passive and active immunization. Now, why is it important to repeat? Because the pregnancy is an immunosuppressed state. So you can have flares happening in pregnancy and in postpartum period. So that is why we are more concerned about what it is in the third trimester, so that we can decide whether the patient is to be put on antiviral therapy. Now, which antiviral? These are the indications at which antiviral therapy, what we would call as a high load. So if the enzymes are elevated more than 2 times, then, and in combination with, we have this load which is specified, a load of 20,000 international units if the patient is hepatitis E antigen positive, and a lower load, that is 2,000 international units if the hepatitis E antigen is negative. So if the enzymes are deranged and the loads are what is shown here on the slide, one needs to start these patients on, antiviral therapy anytime after the first trimester of pregnancy. And in this third trimester, in case the patient is asymptomatic, the enzymes are normal, but if the load is more than 2 lakh, then also we need to start them on antiviral therapy. The choice of drug is either tenofovir or it is lamivudine. So tenofovir basically is a better drug, but it is costlier because it is better because there is less of drug resistance with this drug. So if you are going to give a lamivudine, you have to be sure that the patient has not taken lamivudine in the past, right? But that is cheaper. So you have to put them on this drug, and basically, we continue with this drug, and there is a kind of a debate whether we need to continue it in the postpartum period for 6 months, 3 to 6 months or not. Some people like to continue, but then it is also secreted in the breast milk. Although the literature says it does not have any harmful effect on the baby, but some people would like to stop it as soon as the baby is born. So that is about the choice of antiviral. So that is all about the antenatal management of this patient.
Dr. Manoj wants to comment on the antiviral drugs during pregnancy. Am I audible?
Yeah, these are the true drugs that are safe. All other drugs are not safe. So I would prefer tenofovir. The cost is actually around 600 rupees per month. So pretty cheap, and there is no risk of resistance.
So what is your experience?
Is a very weak drug.
What is your experience? We should continue in the postpartum period or just in the...
For 3 months. Postpartum for 12 weeks, we must continue, because pregnancy being an immune suppressed state, whenever pregnancy is terminated and baby is delivered, her immune response will reappear and flares can occur. So it is better to continue for 3 months.
3 months in the postpartum.
Then also after stopping, monitor LFTs at least once a month for next 6 months to 1 year.
What is your comment for
Dr. Manju?
First trimester, in first 3 months of the pregnancy?
First, actually the indication of antivirals are twofold. First, whether the mother needs antiviral or not. It depends on what is the status of her liver injury. If, as madam has said, if her LFTs are high, if her fibrosis stage is high, if there are any signs of chronic liver disease, then she would need antivirals from the first day of pregnancy or even before that, before planning of the pregnancy. Now, another indication is in the third trimester for prevention of mother to fetal transmission. For that, if the DNA levels are high, about 1 lakh copies per ml is safe limit. More than that, then in the third trimester, we have to give antiviral tenofovir. And in this scenario, we can stop after 3 months, but not in the first scenario when the mother herself is required to take antivirals for her own safety. Because if you're not giving antivirals, then she may decompensate, she may develop jaundice, and she may even die also. So we have to separate 2 indications. For the mother, you have to continue for a long time. For prevention of MTCT, then in the last trimester and up to 3 months.
Right.
And what is the logic of giving a long-term antiretroviral? What is the rationale behind it?
Long-term antivirals are needed for hepatitis B because wherever you stop the antiviral, the virus will come back. Whether it is E positive or E negative. In E positive, the indication for stopping is when the patient becomes E antigen negative, anti-HB appears, and she remains in this scenario for at least 3 years after achieving seroconversion. Then you can stop in E antigen positive. For E antigen negative cases, patient is E antigen negative already. So in this case, antivirus should be continued till HBs antigen is negative. And that is a very challenging endpoint to achieve. Might require even decades also.
Dr. Manoj, can I ask you a question? Interferon therapy versus tenofovir?
Yeah, interferon is contraindicated in pregnancy.
No, not in pregnancy, otherwise.
Before pregnancy also, if you have taken interferon, then for at least 1 year, there is no, pregnancy should not be planned. If either of the partner, male or female, either of them has taken interferon for in the last 1 year, then no interferons. Otherwise, in non-pregnant state, interferon is a better drug because, especially in young people, because it is a limited duration of therapy, and there are more chances of HBs loss. In the next, after interferon, in the next 10 years, there is 25 to 30% chance of HBsAg loss, which is very rare with oral antiviral.
Thank you.
So HBV DNA should always be done if patient is HB positive?
Ideally, it should be done.
Yes.
So
No,
now,
just madam, Dr. Manoj, see, in pregnancy, most of the time, we see a patient who comes with the report of HB antigen positive, right? And patient is asymptomatic.
Right.
Usually, that is what we are seeing. Like a patient was found to be HB antigen positive and asymptomatic. At first visit, always we go for LFT. LFTs are normal.
Okay.
Right. I don't think in those patients HB DNA is required. Only just we need regular follow-up of LFTs.
So in this case, most likely antivirals will not be needed for the mother, but in the last trimester for prevention of mother-to-child transmission.
So in those situations, one can go for
in that situation, it can.
Where do you place the hepatitis?
Another point is if the DNA levels are high only in E antigen positive cases. If patient is E antigen negative, then DNA having a very low chance of DNA above 1 lakh IU per ml. That was our cutoff for starting antivirals in the last trimester.
No,
so
that is
negative patients you can leave also.
No, that is what my query is. If patient HBe antigen is negative, then most of the time the patient is means that is the active disease is not there and her LFT will be normal. So I don't. So why to go for routine HBDNA in all patients?
No, I'm not saying in all patients. So if LFTs are normal, HBsAg is positive, E antigen is negative,
yes,
then you are pretty safe.
Yeah, we're pretty safe.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Now, Dr. Manju Puri, ma'am. Ma'am, how do we, does the mode of delivery change? How do we deliver this patient?
No, we have ample data to support that, these patients do not require a cesarean for preventing vertical transmission. And, we have this paper here, which had done serological markers in 546 children of HPS antigen positive mothers who delivered their infants by elective cesarean section and vaginal delivery. And you look at these p-values, the difference was not significant. So hence it is not desirable to do cesarean only for prevention of vertical transmission. So this was another meta-analysis which had similar results and said that it may protect against HPV transmission, but it is not routinely indicated for a carrier mother in reducing perinatal transmission, because we are going to give prophylaxis, the passive and active prophylaxis together.
So whether the breastfeeding has some effect on this, increasing this transmission?
Yeah, we need to give, no, breastfeeding is allowed, but we need to give, the active and passive immunization. And case a patient is surface antigen positive, it's important that the immunoglobulin and the first dose is given within 12 hours. So, the earlier you give it, the better is the response. And then it is important that all the 3 doses are completed, because most often it is seen that patients who have failures are the ones where the doses have either been missed or have been the first the passive immunization and the dose was given later. So that is what is important. And it is important that we ask the mothers to take care that they do not have cracked nipples. In case they are, then we kind of treat them more aggressively. So that is about it. So we should not stop breastfeeding in any of the patients.
Thank you, Dr. Manju. You very, very excellently explained the case. Now we go to the next case. Dr. Jyoti, can you scroll on?
Yes.
Yeah, this is almost similar case, but she is 34 weeks with prodromal symptom, nausea and vomiting. And ictus is there. The tender hepatomegaly, bilirubin is very high, 15.2. AST, ALT again very high in thousands. ALP is raised. Blood glucose normal. Renal function are normal. Platelets normal. And viral markers are positive. So how you think, what is the possibility? Though it is a case of hepatitis, which hepatitis this presentation is likely possible? Dr. Manju Puri, please.
Well, this is hepatitis E, and we get them somehow. Now we have started having lesser numbers, but we had them in plenty. And if you have a pregnant woman, especially in her last trimester, and she is hepatitis E, we are worried. We are worried because these are the patients who are likely to go into hepatic encephalopathy, and these are the patients who are likely to have intrauterine death. So these are 2 things which would trouble us, and they usually have coagulopathy. They are into, high levels of coagulopathy they would be. So these are patients which are problematic. Now in this patient, if she was in second trimester or in the first trimester, I would not have been worried so much. They would recover like any other acute hepatitis. But in the third trimester, I am happy this patient has got high bilirubin and high enzymes. But in case it was a situation where the bilirubin was high and the enzymes start falling, say a bilirubin is 18 milligram percent and the enzymes are 400, 500, I would be very worried that this is a patient who is going to go into fulminant hepatic failure. And then we would refer and start talking to Dr. Manoj about our patients. We start seeking for liver transplant. And then we start taking a call whether this patient needs to be delivered fast or what do we do. But by the time they usually have IUD, and we've still not got that answer whether we should induce labor in these patients and try to deliver them fast. We are not doing as yet. There is no evidence to that. So they normally have IUD, and we induce them, they deliver, and some of them would recover, some of them would go into hepatic failure, and that usually leads on to a mortality. Some of our patients have got transplant. Maybe Dr. Manoj can tell us about that.
Yeah.
Basically,
Madam, once acute liver failure develops in pregnancy, then the prognosis is very poor without transplant. And although there is no evidence that in HEV, terminating the pregnancy is going to alter the course of the illness. So it is better to shift the patient to some transplant center so that if transplant is needed, it can be done. And before transplant, termination has to be done, because if you do transplant with baby in, the complications rates are very high. It is a tricky situation, but this is what it is.
EPH.
No, just I want to add here about hepatitis E actually. See the situation in North India, which Dr. Manju Puri has also seen these patients. We have around, if we see the jaundice patient and we see the hepatitis patients, around 60% in pregnancy in third trimesters are because of hepatitis E, right? And the presentation, this I am telling from our experience of 20 years at Maulana Azad Medical College and Lok Nayak Hospital, where I have worked with Dr. Ramesh Kar, and we have done hepatitis E studies for last 20 years. So we have got around 60% of hepatitis E in pregnancy, and of these, if we see, around 20% present as a fulminant hepatitis. They only it is not always that they present with mild or without encephalopathy or without fulminant features. 20% directly land up in encephalopathy, and they will present to you in acute liver failure basically. So, and 25% is the mortality in our North India. This is what the we have published all these papers, and there are a lot of studies on that. So because of these seriousness, mainly we are worried about whether these patients are going into encephalopathy or DIC or coagulopathies. So those are the worry point. And mainly conservative management, supportive management for these, and just to pregnancy, obviously, we have observed that if you terminate these pregnancy, they their course is worsened. They very rapidly go into the fulminant part. So it is better to wait for the nature to take care of the pregnancy. Usually IOD occurs, and then we just do the supportive management and observe the patient for acute liver failure. Right. So that is the only thing in hepatitis E. I think Dr. Manju can add on from her experience.
Yeah, I think what is important is 2 quick points. One is what we've learned by experiences, that if you keep the input output of these patients good, especially we tend to give lactulose and all, and they keep having a lot of diarrhea. So we need to make sure that the dose is so much that she just passes 3 or 4 loose stools. So she should not have diarrhea, because then it will be very difficult to maintain her electrolytes and fluid. So you have to take care of all these small things to push the patient, help her ride over this critical period. Second is about fresh frozen plasma. So initially, as soon as the patient used to come, she would have a INR of 6 or 4 or 5. We would start giving fresh frozen plasma. So we've stopped doing that. Now we only give fresh frozen plasma in the peripartum period. So once the patient is for induction or she goes into labor, so we give her 1 full dose of 4 packs, that is 10 to 15 ml per kg, and then repeat the INR, and we get the INR to below 2. And we keep it below 2 till such time she delivers. And during the delivery, all this time while she's in labor, we give 2 units every 8 hourly. And we would give it for 24 hours after delivery, and thereafter we would stop. But in case the patient has any, bleeding from the, rise tube or something, or she has any bleeding tendency, only then we would give fresh frozen plasma. So we've reduced our fresh frozen plasma to, significantly we've reduced to 1/4 or 1/3 of what we used to give. And then during delivery, the senior person should take delivery. It should not be a rough delivery. You must have preparations for, you should have a home catheter, so that, in case there is a PPH, you are prepared to handle, because these patients do not tolerate any kind of blood loss. They are almost on that brink of, they are very precariously, balanced. So anything can tilt. Dyselectrolemia can tilt the balance. The dehydration can tilt the balance. Too much of fluid overload can tilt the balance. So you have to be extremely, extremely careful. And we make sure that we, explore the vagina and the cervix very carefully in these patients, because small, tears would continue bleeding. So we are very careful about all those things. We do not give unnecessary episiotomies, and we make sure that we do conduct a very smooth, gentle delivery. So that is what is the take-home message.
And Dr. Manju,
is there any role of induction
one more
of labor?
thing we can add here,
No.
Dr. Manju.
Yeah.
One more thing we can add here. We have to be careful that even if they deliver without any complication and patient is still has not gone liver failure or ample coagulation, but watch for another 24 to 36 hours for patient in that period, maybe because of the stress of the labor or maybe undiagnosed PPH. So you should not release for another next 24 to 36 hours. I have seen patients go into encephalopathy just after delivery or next day after delivery. So we have to be very careful.
And even, when you're going for your day-to-day round, small things should be noted. If the patient has any disturbed sleep, you must ask, is she sleeping a little more? She need not become frank encephalopathy. So we try and look up and correct if there is any problem like dyselectrolemia or dehydration. Dr. Manoj can definitely give us a few practical tips to this.
Dr. Manoj, one thing also, how will follow the patient of this hepatitis E? So Dr. Manoj.
Madam, after delivery, you have to watch for bleeding as already discussed. And once patient starts improving, her encephalopathy is gone, then she will have a very smooth recovery. It's unlikely to deteriorate further. So maybe monitoring LFTs and PT-INR every week for a couple of weeks is okay. Once she improves, she is not going to deteriorate further.
So main
How to follow the patient, Dr. Manoj?
LFT and PT-INR, man.
Okay,
If you see LFTs are improving, PT-INR is improving, we are good. And
Okay.
gradually you will see within a few weeks, her LFTs would normalize and PT-INR would normalize much earlier also.
So she should be on lifelong follow-up or just
No,
for 6
no,
months
not
and
at all,
then?
not at all. No. As long as her LFTs are become normal, there is no need of follow-up further.
Hepatitis E also is self-limiting disease. It
Yes.
spontaneously recovers in around 8 to 12 weeks.
Dr. Manju
Thank
Puri?
you so much.
Dr. Manju Puri, one question
Yeah.
on the audience. Is there some role of induction of
So
labor?
that's what I said. We have been debating this very aggressively. And one is we are not getting any kind of ethical clearance. We thought that we could do a randomized control trial because we had quite a number of patients. But right now, because when you induce labor, the stress increases. And when the stress increases, it's going to be harmful for the liver. So we are not sure. But what happens is that these patients will definitely develop IUD. Once they develop IUD, then we induce. Because by the time they start going into fulminant hepatic failure and we feel that they have to now go for liver transplant. So this is how it is. But right now we do not have any robust, evidence to say that by inducing labor in these patients, their prognosis will improve.
Any reason why it is high so much in the northern part of the country?
Hepatitis E, Dr. Girija?
Yeah.
Hepatitis E.
This is all feco-oral, no? So it can be. Yeah, so this is just like.
Dr. Girija, what we have observed is fecal-oral, hygiene related, and source of water, if it is contaminated. That is the main part. And what we have also seen the variation in monsoon season, we see more of hepatitis E. And so probably fecal-oral and source of water, we correlate with these two findings. That's why they are more.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Ashok. The next question also comes to you. Since we have dealt with hepatitis B, A, B, and E very elaborately now, coming on to another a very important topic we will discuss in this case. This 30-year primey comes at 36 weeks with labor pains, complaining of nausea, vomiting, malaise, jaundice. She has been treated as viral hepatitis for 2 days at a private hospital. Her ANC has been normal. General physical examination, she is conscious, vitals and BP are normal. She is icteric, there is no pedal edema. Her abdomen, she is 36 weeks, mild contractions, fetal heart is okay. And she is in early labor on pervaginal examination. There is some unclotted blood in the vagina. Now her investigations, as we can all read, that there is a rise of TLC, the platelets are okay, bilirubin is 9.2, AST, ALT around 200, the 244 and 197, ALP 278. Now PT, PTTK, they are increased and INR is 3.25. Now BU and creatinine also marginally raised. Blood glucose is 90, urine normal, ultrasound normal, viral markers are negative. Now, what is the probable diagnosis and how do we manage this case, Dr. Ashok Kumar sir?
Yes, see, this patient is 36 weeks in early labor. Since she is in early labor, and if we by her LFTs, platelet is normal. LFTs, if you see bilirubin is more high, and enzymes are not very high. They are around in between 300, around 300, and alkaline phosphatase is also 278, and but INR is deranged, right? So with this and KFT, renal function test is also just borderline, creatinine is 1.2. So with this, the first and viral markers are negative. So we'll think of either say ICP is because alkaline phosphatase is not very high, and fatty liver is the most probable diagnosis. Usually it is not seen very commonly, but with this scenario and with the low blood sugar levels, it fits into that. But we have to see the other part. Renal parameters are borderline. Coagulopathy, yes. Thrombocytopenia is not there, but PT-INR is abnormal. So these are the few things which are there when we consider management. So diagnosis wise, we'll think of acute fatty liver pregnancy, and obviously in these situations, the idea is to stabilize the patient and to deliver the patient. Give the supportive management to the patient, take care of acute liver failure, as Dr. Manoj has already told, and Dr. Manju, as we have discussed, what all we have to take care, and we have to deliver her. She is in labor, she can be delivered vaginally, but obviously we have to correct her PT-INR. Very important. Before delivery, the target should be to have our platelet more than 50,000, and our INR should be around 2. So we can deliver her by vaginal route. But if she lands up in cesarean for any indication, then our platelet count should be more than 75,000. So that is the only thing we have to be careful about, and supportive care is very important, that she should not go into acute liver failure or have encephalopathy or renal failure. So because these are which add on the complications in these, and we have to take care about her volume, because hypovolemia can set in because of the capillary leak. She have ascites and pleural effusion, and one has to be observe her for acute pancreatitis also, because it has been seen that in these patients pancreatitis also sets in. It may be biochemical or it may be clinical also, and obviously infections, and one has to avoid excessive blood loss at the time of delivery. So these are the patients we have to take, and we have to manage her, and once they deliver, then they recover time. That is the observation which have been made in the so many studies.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. In brief, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, actually, if you have the viral markers and they come negative, and the patient has got coagulopathy or she's in encephalopathy, think of acute fatty liver with negative viral markers and patient in encephalopathy. So that means this divides, because here you have to terminate pregnancy. Here in hepatitis, you don't have to do anything. So it is very important to get the viral markers as fast as possible, and in case they come negative, start thinking and preparing the patient for termination of pregnancy. If you are doing a cesarean section in this patient, do not forget to leave drains. You must leave intrafacial, subfacial drain and also intra-abdominal drain, because they can have bleeding from and hematoma formation. So this is what you must take care of.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think to summarize, acute fatty liver, it is a rare disorder, but it is a fatal disease. Mortality is as high as 20%. Nearly 50% of the patients will have signs of preeclampsia, LCHAD deficiency, and mildly raised enzymes. Bilirubin will be a little less than 10. ALT, AST marginally raised. Dominantly, there will be hypoglycemia as well, coagulopathy, hypofibrinogenemia, and supportive treatment. We start with TRBC, FFP, cryoprecipitate, platelets, and immediate decision for terminating the pregnancy. And as ma'am has rightly told us, that we need to put in drains if we are going for a cesarean, so that the bleeding, we can understand that there is no hematoma inside, so that we know the blood loss. And definitive diagnosis, though, is by liver biopsy. Maybe Dr. Manoj Kumar sir can.
No, it is not usually. It is not usually performed.
It is not performed at all, actually. And the genetic counseling we have to do, because this LCHAD deficiency that is there, because of this, fatty liver is occurring. And if it is recurring in the subsequent pregnancy, we can know it by doing a CVS or a amniocentesis in the prenatal period, so that we can find out if that fetus has got the LCHAD deficiency. And if there is fulminant failure, liver transplant is the answer. So thank you, sir.
No, there are two things which I want to know, Dr. Manoj.
Yes.
Is there any point to doing ammonia levels, or are you doing ammonia levels routinely for these patients?
Ammonia levels are important for predicting the cerebral edema in acute liver failure. Once acute or fulminant liver failure occurs, then ammonia levels are high, then it determines that what treatment modality we have to go. Because after termination of pregnancy, suppose patient is not waking up, she has cerebral edema, then if ammonia levels are high, then CRRT can be given, plasma exchanges can be given. So high ammonia levels indicate that CRRT or plasma exchange is indicated in this patient to control the cerebral edema. And it has prognostic value also.
Yeah.
So
But
we
you are
are
doing
doing
at your center. You are doing at your center.
Yes, we are doing.
You are doing.
One more question, Dr. Manoj. What happens to these patients is they develop such huge ascites after delivery. So after delivery, once these acute fatty liver patients recover, so after 2 weeks, the albumin goes absolutely down and they develop so much of ascites. Is there any role of diuretics in that condition?
Yes, diuretics can be used to control ascites. Albumin can be given
Albumin supplements
to
can be.
control ascites. So these two drugs are very helpful. Mostly they will recover in another few weeks or so.
But we've had patients who were very uncomfortable because of tense ascites which developed after acute fatty liver, recovery from
So
acute fatty liver.
diuretics can be given, albumin can be given, LVPs can be done, 4-5 liters once at a time in albumin cover.
Okay.
And gradually they will improve.
Dr. Manoj, what is the long-term prognosis for these? Whether the full recovery is there or they'll end up with some sort of liver deficiency?
Mostly there is full recovery, but some patients might have underlying problems like LCH deficiency and etc. So a few patients can have recurrence also in subsequent pregnancies. But
Can there be
mostly they will
cirrhosis
recover.
also? Can there be cirrhosis also in these patients?
Cirrhosis not very unlikely to develop unless some other problems are occurring. Otherwise, cirrhosis is not does not develop in acute fatty liver of pregnancy during follow-up.
Right.
So my
Thank you,
next-
sir. Thank you for giving us your experience in between that you are adding to the experience that Dr. Manju Puri, Dr. Ashok Kumar, sir, everybody has put in such practical tips for the viewers. I think it will be really very, very helpful for people who are watching. And coming on to something very, very terrible now, the help. And Dr. Girija Vyas is patiently waiting to tell us about this. She's a master at this. I've heard her in this, and we are going to really find out more in person now today after once we discuss this patient. Dr. Girija now. Dr. Girija, she is 28-year primary, 36 weeks with preeclampsia. She is conscious, vitals are okay. She is 150, 110 BP. Icterus plus, pedal edema plus, 34 weeks with mild contraction, fetal heart is fine, she is in early labor. Now, hemoglobin is 10, PLC 12,000, platelets are 50,000, bilirubin 4.8, AST 144, ALT 197, ALP 278, PT, PTTK, TT increased, INR 3.25, LDH 600, BUN and creatinine quite high, blood glucose normal, albuminuria on urine examination, ultrasounds, vital markers normal. Now, you already know the diagnosis. Now, please let us know what we have to do in this now.
In this particular patient, this is a HELLP syndrome, of course, hemolysis, elevated liver enzymes, and low platelets. And if you go back to the slide which was showing the tests of these patients, you can see that it is not only a pure help, it is also probably a transition that she's going through. Because if there is icterus, then we must start looking at something else also. We may be having acute fatty liver of pregnancy, so our differentials have to be in place. Additionally, if our creatinine is also rising, then we must consider whether this is an HUS kind of a syndrome or a TTS. So therefore, currently now that she is in labor, our first target has to be to deliver her as fast as possible. You can see her platelets are 50,000. That means that it's always better to deliver her by a vaginal route if the baby's condition permits. many a times it's observed that as the labor sets in, there is some element of fetal distress which may make you take them for a C-section. In any case, you have to be prepared with FFPs and do the coagulation screening at a regular interval, because there is very little evidence in the literature which says that FFPs help. But as Madam Manjupuri was saying, that in certain situations, we can use FFPs prophylactically peripartum so that you can avoid the blood loss. And therefore, a very careful and a gentle delivery has to be looked into. And these patients have to be under surveillance. Our challenge is always going to be, usually help is not necessarily relieved by delivery, because it can also occur post delivery, and we have to find out whether this is a real pathology which is in transition. Now there is a typical way of classifying help, but we should all look at all these criteria that are very, very well said in its mnemonic. And any two of these factors also are positive, you must treat this patient. In fact, I would always say that your preeclampsia management at every stage has to be screening for help at all situations, and it is a laboratory diagnosis. So just don't get carried away by the blood pressure. Only blood pressure abnormal reading requires to be looked into whether this is a patient of HELLP, because today we are seeing sometimes HELLP-like pictures occurring even in the absence of proteinuria. So therefore, it is not a typical preeclampsia-like condition that is necessary. Sometimes women may not even have hypertension. So if you find that the woman is looking sick, please start looking for HELLP. And I know over a period of time, I think we'll come to understand that maybe it starts off with HELP, lands her into AFLP as the time transits also. So these things have to be looked into.
Can I add a point, Jyoti?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Please
I
go
think
ahead.
it is very important for everyone to know that if the platelet count is low, you have to give platelets. If the INR is deranged, you have to give fresh frozen plasma. So, the component therapy should be always clear. And whenever the platelets are low, make sure that you get a peripheral smear to rule out spurious thrombocytopenia. Because sometimes there may be, rouleau formation and the platelets may be low. So it should always be confirmed with a peripheral smear manual count as well. Right? And if the platelets are low, then you have to give 1 unit of platelet to increase a single donor SGP. You can have a jumbo pack which will increase a platelet count by 30,000, and a small random donor platelet pack which will raise it by 5,000. So in that numbers you have to give before you take up the patient for
Anyway, platelets always peripartum, only peripartum platelets.
Yeah. That you have made, Dr. Girja. It has to be peripartum. There's no point if you have a patient of thrombocytopenia. These days, even up till 5,000, they do not give any platelets.
Yeah.
So there's no role of giving platelets till they bleed.
Because they don't last more than 4 hours in the circulation.
Yes. It's absolutely to be given peripartum. Very, very important.
Platelets less than 1 lakh, always do the coagulation profile. Always look at the coagulation.
Yes.
I hope that answers, because we are running out of time. Therefore, I thought we must not talk too much about this.
Yeah, Dr. Ashok, sir, would you like to add anything?
One thing which I want to comment, when you have these type of patient, it is very necessary to take the attendant very frequently and document all the time from where the patient is deteriorating, or patient is course of the action. Because if suddenly anything is happened, at that time all ruckus is started. And especially most of us who are in the private practice, not in the corporate hospitals, we have to be very, very careful. It should have it is a multidisciplinary disease, and you have need lots of help, and especially you need a SDU type of thing even after delivery. So think before taking these patients in your smaller nursing home. Always think, take your patient to a bigger setup, so you are very, very safe, medico-legally also, and also otherwise there is no negligence on you, on your part of as a medical treatment.
I completely agree, Ragini, because this is a multidisciplinary approach and you cannot predict the outcome of any of these patients. So you have to be having a teamwork and a team approach to this, including the anesthesiologists and the neonatologists on board with physicians and hepatologists. Maybe you may require even nephrologist to be helping you there, or hematologist also.
Yeah, Dr. Manoj sir, would you like to add anything here? Because we are talking of a multidisciplinary approach here. Your inputs, please.
I think everything has been covered, and I would just like to add that keep a hepatologist also in loop.
That is why I took you up in the loop, sir. That is why.
Dr. Manoj, I want to ask you, however,
Otherwise, madam, you all have covered very well. Indications
Right.
of plasma.
Dr. Manoj Kumar sir, I wanted to ask you a question. See, many times in these very critical situations, we have had dengue or FLP and patients, then the hepatologist has written, do a liver transplant. Now, this is something very difficult to access. Ragini, you can also tell us what should be our stand, because the moment any specialist write this, what is an obstetrician supposed to do?
Well, liver transplant.
Transplantation under them and become the referral doctor. Let them do the transplant.
Right, liver transplant, then there is indication of liver transplant. So, whether it can be done or not.
It is not so easily accessible,
No,
doable.
It is not actually easier said than done.
Start looking for a donor immediately.
Madam, it is such an urgent thing. You know, it's such a critical time. When are we going to look for a donor?
My only point is that you shift the patient to a transplant center.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Otherwise,
Yeah, that's it.
very difficult and
Very
messy.
right.
For obstetric patients, sir, there are no takers so easily.
Transplant unit they take.
Short of transplant, there are some options also like plasma exchange, CRRT. These are upcoming things that have been shown to improve outcomes in, especially in liver failure patients.
Yeah. So now we are coming to a very less seen by us actually obstetricians, and because since you are here in the panel, that is why Dr. Savita has included this case. Dr. Savita, please.
Dr. Manoj, for you, though we are getting patients of portal hypertension as well. So if a patient of portal hypertension, 34 years, comes to us, and she comes to you, in fact, not to us. So what preconception counseling you will give to her?
So first, some general comments about that. So generally the pregnancy will aggravate or worsen the portal hypertension due to various mechanisms. And in fact, about 2/3 of pregnant women can have transient esophageal varices, small esophageal varices also. And portal hypertension worsening will be maximum in the second trimester and at the time of delivery. That is the maximum time, maximum period where when complications will occur, patient will bleed, patient will develop liver failure, ascites, and other things. So first of all, pre-conception counseling is very important. Psychological status assessment and how much is the desire for pregnancy is important. Then portal hypertension can have non-cirrhotic causes and cirrhotic causes. If patient is non-cirrhotic, then the risk of complications is less. If the patient is cirrhotic, then you have to assess whether she is compensated or decompensated. If the patient is decompensated, then it is a strict contraindication for pregnancy. The risk of bleeding and other complications are very high. So if patient is decompensated or MELD is more than 10, then no pregnancy should be planned. Strict counseling for no pregnancy. In non-cirrhotic patients, pregnancy can be planned, but we have to take certain considerations into things. First of all, endoscopy should be done to see for the varices. If varices are there, it is better to band, and at the time of pregnancy, her varices should be small. She can be started on beta blockers also. If no endoscopy has been done previously before pregnancy, then in the second trimester at around 20 weeks, an elective endoscopy can be planned. And if we find large varices, then banding can be done. Otherwise, the management of portal hypertension is pretty challenging, and keep hepatologists in the loop. You have to manage complications as they arise. If we banned before pregnancy, then the complication risk of variceal bleeding is less. But if patient is cirrhotic, then the liver failure is more, DIC is more, stillbirth, postpartum hemorrhage. These are the other complications that we need to tackle. And
Dr.
monitoring
Ashok?
of LFT is very important. Every 2 weeks monitoring should be done. And in cirrhotic patients, especially if you find that liver function is worsening, then termination of pregnancy is better than continuing that pregnancy.
I can remember only one.
Dr. Ashok Kumar, yeah.
Just 1 minute. I can remember only one thing when we are dealing with portal hypertension. Obviously, we have to manage, as Dr. Manoj Kumar has told. But remember, I think splenomegaly is there. So
Yes,
one should be careful about fundal pressure at the time of either vaginal delivery or cesarean delivery.
Very
So
important.
that, as a obstetrician, we have to keep in mind that we should not be applying too much fundal pressure, otherwise we'll have splenic rupture.
Yeah.
I have done 2
Very
splenectomies at the time of C-section.
Pardon, madam?
Splenectomy at the time of C-section, 3 cases.
Sometimes splenectomy can be done at the same time, at the time of cesarean section. Yes, that is possible. And if advisable, it can be done. But because we are very so fond of doing fundal pressure and we jump onto the abdomen, so one has to be careful on that.
And uncontrolled fundal pressure.
Yes.
Dr. Manju Puri, will you like to share your experience with this?
No, we don't have much experience as far as portal hypertension is concerned. I think esophageal varices bleeding is what we've come across once. So you have to supplement blood and get a banding done. There is no other.
What about mode of delivery? Means how we should deliver these women?
No, I don't have so much of experience. I think they can be left for vaginal delivery. That is what I feel.
Yeah, actually we are getting only very less, not severe varices, milder form we are getting, so we can go ahead with the vaginal deliveries in these women.
Oh, recently we delivered.
Cesarean section will have a lot of complications because of the collaterals in the abdominal wall and intra-abdominal collaterals also. So it is better to do a vaginal delivery with maybe assistance during the second phase of labor.
We keep blood ready in such cases, sir, and the delivery should be in a tertiary center where we have the blood and the components
Obviously,
ready.
yes.
Absolutely.
So that is very important because this is a very a case of very highly mortal, and the mortality rate can be very high if we do it in a smaller center. So with a multidisciplinary approach, with a backup, we should just handle these cases. This is something that Dr. Savita can now briefly, she can brief whatever we have discussed. Dr. Savita, would you like to highlight this slide, what we have discussed all throughout?
It's just a summary that we haven't discussed the hyper-MSQ, time didn't allow us, but just to see the investigative protocols. If this LDH is more than 600 and patient is having hypertension, proteinuria, low platelets, then one thing which goes is the health symptom. And this acute fatty liver, again, if there is excessive nausea, vomiting, ALT, AST is raised, and hypoglycemia is there, then we can think of the acute. Though we have discussed all these in very detail. So these are two conditions which can lead to acute liver failure. This is HELLP syndrome and acute fatty liver. And cholestasis is very well explained. Bile acids are the culprits which can lead to IUD, and investigations, the bilirubin is not too high, maybe 4 or 5 in this, and ALT maybe up to 1000, that can be increased. So this is a take-home message.
Yeah. Dr. Manju Puri ma'am can again highlight on this, whatever we've discussed about the jaundice, ma'am. Can you please give us in nutshell what we do when we encounter a patient with jaundice in a second and third trimester, because we are winding up and we just want the highlights. People, still more than 200 people are logged in with us. So your summary, ma'am.
Yeah, actually, let's understand that majority of patients which we get are hepatitis E. That is what we have. That's the majority of the patients. Some of them you will get as HELLP. HELLP can be a partial HELP. I think Dr. Girija has really outlined it very well. And then we have acute fatty liver, which is the other component. And of course, you get plenty of hepatitis B surface antigen positive. So we still have a good number of them. So I think each case has been discussed at its own, separately as case scenarios. If it is hepatitis B surface antigen positive, we have to have, we have to have a hepatologist on board, because this is a condition which can have chronic outcomes. So you can't leave a patient with surface antigen positive without any surveillance. So it is important that we have a hepatologist on board and kind of right from the beginning of the management, and take the patient through the pregnancy, and we've discussed that. And we are concerned about the, we must do a hepatitis E antigen. And if the hepatitis E antigen is negative, the enzymes are okay, then it is fine. You may not go for HPV DNA testing, but in case E is positive, then we must get a HPV DNA testing done between 26 and 28 weeks and put her on antivirals. So that is one part. And we need to give, both passive and active immunization within 12 hours. Then we should know the indications of terminating pregnancy in a patient of jaundice. So which are the cases where we need to terminate? So these are two indications. One is HELP and one is acute fatigue. So we must try and identify these and separate them out, because here the management would be termination of pregnancy. So it is very important to identify that and make sure that you have good amount of blood and blood products available. So don't try doing these deliveries at places where you do not have a backup. So it is important that we have a proper backup, and it's good to be aware of all the differential diagnosis. And as far as the breastfeeding is concerned, it should be continued in all the cases. I don't think so there's any reason where we should not give breastfeeding. So I think that's what I feel to summarize the whole thing.
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am. And this is the last slide that we have of severe jaundice in the third trimester, where we can see what all the symptoms, and according to the level of serum bilirubin and the enzymes, how we can differentiate whether it is a hepatic failure or a fatty liver or a HELP. And I think anybody can explain it. Dr. Savita can wind it up with this slide.
At this stage, I think Dr. Manjupuri very well explained each and everything very nicely. She has summarized each and every point. That hepatitis is the commonest type of hepatitis which we are getting in our practice, day-to-day practice. And that these are three causes for acute liver failure. And in these all three, when these we need the urgent termination of the pregnancy, because this HELP is again we have to terminate the pregnancy, acute fatty liver, and again in the hepatitis is one thing which you can wait, because that is not dependent on the pregnancy. Because these are pregnancy-induced acute fatty liver and the HELP syndrome. Other is independent of that. Then we have to look for the other things. If patient going into failure, then again most of the time patient present with the IUD. If already IUD is there, most likely she will go into labor within 24 to 48 hours. So there is no need to hurry up for the induction. And then very, very important to remember about the sudden IUDs in case of idiopathic cholestatic pregnancy jaundice. That a take-home message. Just deliver them earlier. If you say we can take up the questions from the audience is having questions.
Yes, we can take that, Doctor. Yes.
Time permits.
Yes.
Yeah.
We can have few questions because we have such a beautiful panel here. I don't think we'll get them together again. So we have to make the max of best use of our panelists. If we have some questions, I don't have it on my screen. Can somebody, Dr. Savita, if you have the questions, because I'm not able to see the chat box.
I will.
Ma'am, you have to go.
Yeah. Dr. Jyoti, just I want to say something here.
Right, sir.
See, obstetric cholestasis. See, we have talked about idiopathic cholestasis of pregnancy. But now what we are seeing that in second trimester also we are finding patient coming with that type of LFTs, right? Itching is not there or mild itching is there. So see, one has to keep in mind that cholestasis is a physiological phenomenon in pregnancy, number one. So little bit cholestasis will occur in pregnancy because of hormonal changes. But if it is disturbing or the enzymes are too much or alkaline phosphatase is high and patient is having symptoms also, then first of progesterone, because progesterone is a drug which most of the time is administered to the patient in one way or other way. And that may be the reason. So if in the second trimester we are finding these type of picture, usually because ICP is seen in the third trimester, I mean in or early third trimester. But if you see a little bit early, think of progesterone or some other drug which can cause these type of picture. So not all cholestasis will be IHCP. So that I want to tell.
Very, very rightly you have highlighted. We have been, we have seen the use of progesterone like water. Everybody just with a little threatened abortion, with pain, they left, right, and center. We have been using progesterone, and maybe that is why we are seeing so many of these cases coming up early in the second trimester rather than a proper full-fledged.
It is very clearly
obesity also is there. Obesity.
Exogenous progesterone, does it cause really cholestasis? It is not still proven.
Many evidences say no.
Estrogen, which is causing the cholestasis. Progesterone, yes, if it happens, you have to stop. But exogenous progesterone is the cause. Still, it is not proven. So we cannot say this.
Underlying obesity can be the reason actually, and immobility, sedentary lifestyle.
Second thing which we have to think about these patients, many patients are of the PCOD, pre-diabetics, having a grade 1 and grade 2 fatty liver. They are underlying fibrosis in the liver, which can be a cause of this pruritus and the liver function, which we never thought.
Okay, can I take your leave?
Thank you.
Questions left for Dr. Girija in the chat box?
There is a question asking whether there is a gray zone but help if it's an atypical presentation. How will you differentiate between HUS and TTPS, and how to establish the diagnosis?
This is a good.
We can go to that slide which you were just displaying. You can see here that you have to look at the bilirubin levels, and if you see the enzymes, when they're very high, it is fulminant hepatitis, while it would be HELLP when it is the enzymes are less than 500, AFLP if they are in the middle of there, and whenever there is associated renal function abnormalities, then you must start thinking of TUS in these patients. I hope that answers.
Yeah. Any other questions there? Can you see Dr. Girija in the box? Because I cannot see that. But can you please read out the questions?
Jyoti ma'am, you can just scroll down. There is a Q&A icon in the down. Or
it's not opening.
You just click. You just click that.
This question, what is the dose of FFP during peripartum period in hepatitis E patient? So Manju, Dr. Manju?
Yeah, sorry. Yes. Yeah.
Kindly repeat the dose of FFP during peripartum period in hepatitis C patient. And there's another question on the hepatitis.
There is a question on whether we should look for anti-LKM antibodies in an early onset IHCP.
Okay, so for the peripartum, fresh frozen plasma, we have to give the first loading dose is almost 4 to 5 fresh frozen units. So basically the dose is 10 to 15 ml per kg body weight. That's the first dose. And then we repeat after giving that, we repeat the INR. If the INR is still more than 2, then you can repeat the full dose once again, right? And once the INR comes below 2, then give it 2 units every 8 hourly for till up to 24 hours after delivery. And then we do not give any more.
One more question, Dr. Manju, it is for you. Viral hepatitis is more severe with pregnancy. So terminating pregnancy, will it help the maternal prognosis?
Yeah, we've already discussed at great length that we feel that, it might help, but we do not have any robust data to say that. Because suppose you induce labor and the patient dies, then it will be very difficult for you to explain based on what have you done that intervention.
So there is a question following it. If you either way inducing labor after IUD,
yes.
So you not induce when baby is live. So either time the liver is going in stress.
So we are equally confused about this thing. Maybe Dr. Ashok wants to add, but
yes, Dr. Ragini, I will add here.
Yeah, most of the patients would go into labor themselves. They do go into labor once IUD sets in. Is it right? But we do sometimes induce labor as well. And we've taken sometimes liberty of inducing them even before that. But I would not suggest,
No.
we do not have data to support it actually.
Dr. Ragini, actually, see, I will explain it. See, when the patient with hepatitis E is there and patient is going for acute liver failure, because that is a risk. So if in that situation, if we induce labor, so it gives a stress, release of steroid and all those things. And that itself is factor for deterioration of the condition, number one. Number two, if in the process she may get infection, she may have PPH. Again, those are potentially aggravating factors. So ultimately you may aggravate the situation. So best policy is wait and watch, observe. Usually patient go in space labor. Or if IUD occurs, even still, actually, we don't induce still, we wait for the spontaneous onset. Just keep a watch, supportive management, because what we feel that if we induce unnecessary, why to give a point or a stimulus to a patient who is already a sick situation, because we don't have any evidence that by delivering the placenta or the baby, the situation will improve. So that is why we just keep
So tell me, hello.
conservative management.
Yeah, Dr. Girija, there is a question, is vaginal delivery advocated for cases with mild splenomegaly, and is the risk of rupture increased in vaginal delivery? What do you say?
No, no. You have to take what is called as, I think Madam has come up with a nice terminology, gentle delivery, whether it is vaginal or C-section.
Okay, right. Now, Bharti is asking how to manage unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia complicating pregnancy. Dr. Manoj, sir, a very quick answers.
So, unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia can be due to Gilbert syndrome, most common, about 4% of the prevalence in the population. So, most likely it will be Gilbert syndrome, then hemolysis can be there. So, mostly it is conservative management. No specific intervention will be required unless you find that INR is increasing or some complication is developing, then you have to be very cautious.
Right.
Otherwise, it will resolve on its own.
Okay. Malini is asking, in IHCP presenting in early second trimester, do you need to test for anti-LKM antibody, anti-microsomal antibody, or other autoimmune causes? Also, to you, sir.
I don't think so much workup is required unless you have the suspicion of autoimmune hepatitis, like IgG. First, you have to do hepatitis B, then hepatitis C, then an ultrasound, then serum bile acids. If you still feel that something else is needed, you don't get a diagnosis, then you can get an IgG, ANA, asthma, and LKM. This is the fourth step.
Shobha is telling us, Dr. Shobha is thanking us for pointing out not to use overuse progesterone because many are using without indication. Thank you, Dr. Shobha. Now, we have Dr. Pramila Malik here joining, who's asking us why hepatitis E is more severe with pregnancy. Dr. Manju, ma'am.
I think Dr. Manoj would answer that.
Okay, Dr. Manoj again.
It has something to do with the hormones during pregnancy, and it has been shown that HEV has affinity to progesterone receptors in the liver, and somehow the progesterone levels, it leads to more release of cytokines and other factors that injure the liver. And so fulminant hepatitis, FHF, is much more common in HEV during pregnancy. It has to do with the pregnant state.
Right. So, Dr. Archana Berry asking specifically, Dr. Manju ma'am, now you have to answer this. Role of cholestyramine in ICP.
No,
Okay,
actually,
Jyoti,
we do have...
Jyoti, can I add here?
Yes, definitely, sir.
Yeah.
Definitely.
See, why hepatitis E is more common or more in pregnancy and third trimester. Dr. Manoj has rightly said, see, they are hormone in pregnancy. And Dr. Pramila, I will ask you to search the literature, hepatitis E in North India. You will find a lot of evidences which we have published. Estrogen, progesterone, those are in pregnancy, those hormonal changes are responsible. Then we have progesterone actually regulatory genes which are there, they are also responsible for worsening of hepatitis E in third trimester. Then we have, as Dr. Manoj has told about cytokines. Cytokines play a very important role. And along with these, two factors which are more common in our there, because it is a disease of developing countries: poor nutrition of the mothers and poor antenatal care. These all we have published data, and these two are also contributing to the severity of hepatitis E in pregnancy as well as mortality in pregnancy.
Right, sir. Cholestyramine in ICP, Dr. Manju?
Yeah, actually, I have no experience of using it. Udiliv is the drug of choice, and that is what we use normally. And it is only in one patient we had to add rifampicin. So I have no experience of using cholestyramine.
Anybody has used?
Side effect also.
Yeah, it has got lots of side effects.
Lots of side effect. Usually, if it is only uncontrollable pruritus, only then we are thinking into adding something, because finally no drug is going to affect the course of the disease. Disease is there, whatever you are going to give, whether Udiliv, whether cholestyramine, or adding one or two medicine. So you have
yeah, Dr. Ragini ma'am, Dr. Chandan has asked you a question. How do we manage a patient of obstetric cholestasis not on progesterone?
Wait and watch. You can't do it.
It's more than 40, and her patient has developed at 14 weeks only, with bile acid more than 40 on highest dose of Udiliv at 14 to 16 weeks of pregnancy. Now what do we do here?
I will refer Dr. Manoj that patient to answer.
Let Dr. Manoj handle such a difficult case. Okay. Sir, okay. Dr. Shobha, quick overview of postpartum contraception. We are not talking of contraception here, ma'am.
No, she's asking in these diseases, you are going to give what postpartum contraception?
Okay. I'm very sorry. Okay. Dr. Ashok, sir, what postpartum contraception in these cases of liver diseases?
See, we have to avoid hormonal.
Right. No hormones. So we should be using IUCD, sir?
Yes, IUCD can be used, yes.
Okay. And sir, the injectable depot?
No, again, that is a progesterone.
No, not a big no-no?
Yeah, yes.
Right. So Deepika is again asking, prolonged IUD might cause DIC. So what should we do? Should we deliver this? I think we should. Dr. Manju, ma'am.
I have already, expressed that we normally would leave them alone, and because the patient is already in having prolonged INR, so you would not know whether DIC is also contributing to that, right? So here we leave them alone, and we would do induction only if we feel patient is going in fulminant hepatic failure and has to go for liver transplant. That is only indication where we would speed up the delivery. As of now, from whatever evidence is available, right? So although I do share Deepika's thoughts, because we also strongly feel sometimes that we might, if we intervene, we will be able to save the baby. The mother, we are not sure, but the baby can be saved in case we would intervene early. But then whether the baby will actually tolerate the stress of labor, and would it result in intrapartum IUD, we do not know. And doing a cesarean for these patients is not an easy game. It is actually, a very, very critical scenario, right? So the patient can die of hemorrhage.
Dr. Manoj, can you answer this question? For hepatic encephalopathy and liver cirrhosis, any therapeutic nutrition is available?
Therapeutic nutrition for hepatic encephalopathy in pregnancy, any of the supplements do not have proven efficacy, do not have proven safety, so it is better not to use them. There is no safety data of any of the like amino acid mixtures or Lola. There are so many nutritional products, but these are all for the non-pregnant people, none in the pregnancy.
So I think already we still have Dr. Ragini ma'am. We said you said more than 100 participants. That means it is a very successful webinar. And after 1 hour, 50 minutes, we still have 131 participants logged with us. So it is a super successful seminar because of you, star panelists, and I would love to thank you. Thank Dr. Mandakini Meg here, and Dr. Parag Binewala, where under ICOG we have done this. And I would like to thank Dr. Ragini, who's the chair, who's the president of Her of Gyne, under who's the second sort of organization which has taken this CME under their banner. So congratulations, Dr. Ragini and Dr. Mandakini ma'am, for such a nice CME webinar. And I would thank from the bottom of my heart Dr. Manoj Kumar, who has enlightened us, Dr. Ashok Kumar, Dr. Manju Puri, Dr. Girija Wahag, Dr. Parag, who have just cleared so many of our doubts. And at the end, but not the least, I would love to thank Tablets India, where Mr. Panda has been the instrument who has been the host today afternoon for this webinar, Mr. Manoj and Mr. Rajput. And to thank Dr. Savita Singhal, and actually she has been under so much, Dr. Savita Singhal's husband got operated yesterday for hernia, and she was absolutely stranded between him, taking care of him, and between this webinar, preparing the PPTs and giving me the inputs. And I would love to host it again with Dr. Savita, from whom I learn so much every day, every now and then. And thank you so much, everybody. Anything more to add, Dr. Ragini? Would you like
delegates? Without you, it is not successful, and we are not here till so much time.
Yeah.
And HROBGYN is committed for bringing more and more on the subject which is less talked. So we will come in with the next episode with our learned panelists, with the ICOG. Thank you, everyone, and bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jyoti ma'am, thank you very much, Doctor, for such a wonderful and informative session. And thank you once again from Tablets India.